My next guest is part of the president's inner circle. Brad Parscale was often cited as one of the masterminds behind President Trump's victory, serving as the campaign's digital director the last go-around. Now he is taking the helm as President Trump's campaign manager for 2020, and he joins me now with an exclusive announcement that we will get to in just a minute. Brad, good to see you. Thanks for being here tonight. You listened to Trace's reporting there. How difficult does that kind of stuff make your job in terms of the tweets, the Jeff Sessions issue?
No, I mean, I don't think that makes my job any more difficult. Look, I had a relationship with Jeff Sessions over the campaign. As you know, I was one of the very first people on the campaign, was there since February of 2015. It's a disappointment for myself as well. He knows as much as I do that there was no collusion. He was there. He was around. It wasn't like he was in there making large decisions, but he was watching. And so it's a disappointment. I 100% think that President Trump would have known that he was going to recuse himself. He would have chosen someone else, someone that could have made sure that we could move on from this.
Do you think he should resign?
No, I don't think it's about that. I think we have to finish the job at hand now. I think we need to get past this as a country. I think when the final reports come out and we see there's no collusion with Russia, that we ran a legitimate campaign, the president is legitimate, president of the United States, and all these things finally come to conclusion because of all the political part behind of it, then the president will make a decision he wants to, and I have complete faith that he'll make a great decision that's best for this country.
I always find it interesting talking to you because you ran the whole digital side of the campaign, the advertising in these remote places where you hadn't seen voters turn out the way they did during the Trump campaign. So I know it's especially frustrating for you to hear that, the Russians sort of somehow managed to throw the campaign to President Trump. And in terms of what they were doing, right? Didn't you intersect at some point if they were, putting all these ads out on Twitter and Facebook and you're doing the same thing?
It's like saying a light rainstorm in one part of the city flooded the entire city. It just doesn't happen. What they did was a couple of raindrops inside of a waterfall of things that were occurring from legitimate sources and paid campaigns. I continue to see this as a political witch hunt. The president is 100% right with all that. And regardless of what some people maybe have done 10 years ago, it doesn't matter. The campaign was run every day as a legitimate campaign.
So I thought it was very interesting. Ben Rhodes just wrote a book, and in the book he says that President Obama said to him that when he was asked to go to Michigan to campaign in October, that he knew something was up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the final answer was when she canceled her firework display. But yeah, I think they all started scrambling at the end. I think we just had better data. I mean, they just hadn't run an operation that was sophisticated for that time period of what we know now. I mean, the kind of things the Republican National Committee can tell us now, the way we can see the future of how voting scores are going to happen, we were able to make really smart decisions, and we did that.
So there's a couple areas that people say are potential vulnerabilities for the president. Suburban voters, suburban women in particular, outside of some of the nation's big cities, who ended up voting for President Trump, and whether or not they're going to do that this time around. Blue-collar voters, the forgotten men and women of America that the president talks so much about. You say that the data so far looks really good. What about those groups? How are you going to get them to turn out?
Well, I think there's a couple things here. You've got two parts in what you just said. First is, the data's never looked better for the president. I don't say that, and articles are written that I say that just to make him happy. It's just not true. I mean, we've run the largest data operation survey work in the country, and we see that America is starting to see that their personal economies are getting better, national security is getting better, the things that are around there are happening. And I think they're starting to see these accomplishments. As much as the media doesn't want, outside of a couple stations and a couple people, how much they don't want to talk about the accomplishments, they're starting to get through. And that's why today, one of the things I'm introducing today is promiseskept.com, and because that site has every accomplishment almost that Trump has done. There might be a few missing. We're going to continue to add them. There's so many accomplishments. Almost every 24 to 36 hours, there's another one since he's become president. In 500 days, he's accomplished so much. He's turbocharged the economy. He's crushed ISIS. He's killed all these, regulations that were killing jobs. I mean, he just continues to do these things. But on their site, those are the top things that people know about, but all these little things, hundreds of them, people can go through and see. The media doesn't talk about those things. And I think when suburban people see that and they see this personal economy, that improvement, that they can put their kid in ballerina class, they can buy a new car, they can do these things, it's going to have a significant impact.
Yeah, and I think people do care, first and foremost, about how they are doing, and not as much about some of these issues that we hear a lot about. But again, back to the message, does it frustrate you as the person who's in charge of the message going forward when it gets mucked up with, all of this stuff about Jeff Sessions? Because there are, people in some of these suburban areas who are watching all that, and they're kind of wondering whether or not the wheels are coming off.
I think one of the most interesting things, as you know, before this, I was not very political. I didn't work in politics. I worked in corporate America. And coming into Washington, D.C., you really learn what a bubble is. And I think that people see so much different view here than the American. When Americans coming home in suburban Philadelphia, they're saying, how am I going to, pay my car payment? How am I get my kid to soccer camp tonight? The noise level is a lot less, and what they really feel and what they go vote for is the things that really affect them. And the DC and the media can spin up all these stories they want, but what's funny about it is the more they do it, the more Trump continues to rise.
All right, so let me ask you this before I let you go. I know you've been talking a lot yourself about Apple and news, and Apple picking out what news is right for you based on the other things that you're interested in, which tells me that that's one area that you are concerned about in terms of messaging.
Well, I will tell you that I've been very frustrated that a small section of people in Northern California, probably one of the most liberal portions of America, is somehow trying to dictate what the rest of America can consume, who can be the voice, and it really worries me. It worries me that possibly 3 to 4 executives have enough control to control exactly what you read, what you listen to, what you see, and I think that can have a biased opinion on people. And I think that what we need to do is have an open area, and I think of freedom that you can consume all types of content and make the decision yourself. I believe that most people in America, if they see both sides, will make the right choice.
Yeah. I think some people really need to be so aware of the messages that are being sent to you through your phone and everywhere else. You just want to understand that a lot of them are being sent to you intentionally. Before I let you go, I talked about Make America Great Again. Is promises kept the slogan for 2020?
No. I mean, Mr. Trump has continued to talk about keep it great, keep America great. But, promises kept right now is one of the kind of sub-slogans. And what that means is he made promises and he's keeping them. And what you can do is log on this website, promiseskept.com, and you can see that each and every promise he's made, which is hundreds of them. I mean, one nearly every 36 hours he's trying to keep. More promises kept than probably any president in the history of this country.
You think Dennis Rodman's a good person to help represent America in the North Korea summit?
Yeah, he was a good rebounder for the Bulls. That's all I know.
You could be a good rebounder for the Bulls. You're talking. Brad, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.